Okay, good evening and welcome to the Trout Gallery and to the opening of the museum's new exhibition, In Light of the Past, Photography 1839 to 2021. I'm Philip Ehrenfeit, director of the Trout Gallery, and it's my pleasure to host this online exhibition opening. To say a few words about the show and to acknowledge a number of those who made this exhibition possible, and to introduce the 6 co-curators who produced the exhibition and to hear a little bit about some of their research in conjunction with the project. Presently, I'm in the main atrium of the museum in the gallery and with one aspect of the exhibition on display behind me. In Light of the Past is this year's senior art history major curatorial project. In fact, before I go any further, is this being recorded, Bianca, or is that my control?
Yes, it's being recorded.
Okay, thank you so much. I'll return, I'm sorry. In Light of the Past is this year's senior art history major's curatorial project. As many of you know, each year the Department of Art and Art History combines with the Trout Gallery to produce 2 exhibitions in the spring. One is designated, or rather one is designed in conjunction with the art history major's capstone experience, the fruits of which are now before you. The second is designed in conjunction with the studio major's thesis show, which will open in late April. And thanks to the kind graces of the faculty in the studio department, this year we'll have both exhibitions on display through graduation and actually through the summer and into the early fall. So we'll really have a good opportunity to present the students' work here. As this year's seminar advisor, I began working with the students last fall to devise an exhibition concept, develop the various themes for the show, to select works for the exhibition, design the layout, prepare didactic materials, and to produce the catalog. So it's a pretty large menu of responsibilities for the students. As seminars go, this one is remarkably demanding. As some of you may know, all of the students on campus are required to do a capstone experience, and this one, I think, takes the cake for complexity. It also requires students to produce a scholarship and curated exhibition in a narrow stretch of time. On top of these usual demands, this project this year had to be conducted entirely online, which is terribly difficult when dealing with hundreds of physical objects. Indeed, the museum profession is all about physical objects, which presented unusual challenges in this effort. In essence, it boils down to time. Everything takes longer under the present circumstances. And those of you in various capacities, both as students, faculty, and administrators and staff, you can certainly commiserate with how things take longer than you expect them to. I did little to make this easier by proposing an expansive exhibition topic, one that draws together nearly 150 objects. In fact, this is one of the most complex exhibitions organized by the Trout Gallery, at least in my memory. Although this placed unusual stress on everyone, the results of the exhibition speak for such risk-taking and the rewards that come with it. However, in the process, I've earned the eternal debt of so many individuals, I can't even begin to list them all. At this time, I'd like to introduce the exhibition, just give you an overview since you can't be here to see the show right now. And then I will introduce the 6 co-curators responsible for the project. After my brief overview, each of the students will present a few minutes of their research on that they're producing for the exhibition catalog. Okay, all right, let me advance through here. Now I know that you can't be here in person, so I will try to give you an experience similar to what you would have had this evening, which is to walk up the flagstone steps of the Weiss Center, pass under the archway here, and in light of the past, telling you to follow that up the stairs. You would approach the entrance to the Weiss Center and then continue inside where you would find very familiar now means and pathways to follow the various health restrictions that we now face. But ultimately, your destination would be inside the Trout Gallery, looking down into the main atrium space here. And this is how it looks, well, basically where I'm sitting now. The exhibition is divided into 3 major parts, and it asks the question, in fact, it poses questions more than it answers them. And I think it's rather provocative in that way. This exhibition asks the question, how do we experience photographs? And how does that experience shape our understanding and response to them? And the exhibition is divided into three major parts. The first part is this atrium area here, which concerns seeing photographs in a formal gallery or museum setting. This section here is curated by Tenzin Crowley, and she'll have a few remarks to say later as we circle back to each of the co-curators. So this addresses the question of how do we experience real photographs in a formal presentation? This occupies the first part of the exhibition. It then moves into, this is the second view of the same area. It then moves into the second part of the show, which is a long gallery, which is labeled in this particular slide here, at home, which is a domestic environment. And it asks the question, how do you experience photographs in a domestic sphere? And there are several parts to this component, and it involves the work of three students. First, it deals with portraiture, particularly daguerreotypes and tintypes. And this area is the area of research for Emma Larson Whitaker. She'll be talking to you a little bit more about that shortly. I just can't help but add here the lighting and the display here is the work of James Bowman, who did it's just a spectacular job making these works so stunning. Once you walk into the galleries, you'll just be drawn to these because they're so magical in their appearance. And Jamie brought out all of that magic in this just gorgeous display. The second component within this domestic sphere deals with mounted photographs. And this area is under the area of responsibility by Hill Goburn. And it concerns a wide range of late 19th and early 20th century photographs that were mounted on cards, some of which include the ones you see here, some being portraiture, others being, as you see in the upper right mounted set of photographs from the Carlisle Indian School. You can still see on the right there the photographs from the Carlisle Indian School looking down now the long gallery. This covers a whole range of material that you would experience in a domestic sphere, including the photographs I've just mentioned, but also albums. And you see cases in the foreground and in the background that include photo albums, which you see here and here, okay? These kind of fall between a number of members of the curatorial team. Hill works a little bit on this, as does Jackson Rhodes, because he also covers aspects of books and albums. So there's a bit of, so we say shared areas of responsibility. This part of the exhibition then moves us through. Here you can see the albums a little more closely here. It also moves us into the area of printed books, which you see on the back left portion of the slide here. And this is the realm in which photographs, not in their original form, but in their reproduced form, takes their force in our experience, and the importance of reproducing photographs in books and journals. And in this area here, Jackson Rhodes will talk about his work on Life magazine in particular, and the role of printed photographs in journalism and its impact on our society. Again, though, all within the domestic sphere, because we typically experience magazines and books and things like that, and albums at home. The last portion of this domestic area concerns snapshots. And this area is the responsibility of Anna Elena Karlova. And she works on, in this particular project, aspects of snapshot photography, what made it possible, the interest that Kodak, Eastman Kodak Company had in producing cameras and film that supplied this genre, this area of photography that deals with informal photography. We then move to the final third of the exhibition, which is in a camera obscura, or in a dark room. And this deals with images that are projected, photographic images that are projected or illuminated. When you step into this long, narrow gallery, which functions as a projection space, a theater, if you will, you see evidence of projected imagery across time, beginning at the far end and moving towards us with things like magic lantern slides and magic lanterns that You see a magic lantern projector right here. And then you also see early color slides. And then lastly, 35 millimeter slides. Well, I should say penultimately 35 millimeter slides, because lastly is of course an iPhone and the whole transformation of photography through through the digital realm. I should point out also, as part of the projection, which you see here on the far gallery wall here of this camera obscura, you notice that there is you'll find it is a whole range of 3 to 4 minute programs that deal with everything from the invention of magic lantern slides to photographic black and white slides, all the way up to the present. And it includes a project that we did in conjunction with the show, which asked members of the Dickinson College community to submit to us photographs of their experience during this year of COVID. And the result is this publication you see on the right called Snapshots. And in the gallery, the snapshots are all shown in rapid display here. You see here one by Elizabeth Krause. It shows a bed with keys on it, which was that moment before she left the dorm last March. So just as she was leaving, she took a photograph of her dorm room, which you can see is quite empty, and the keys for the room, which the student life asked all students to do, just leave their keys and take their belongings as they left campus under rather hurried circumstances. So that's the whole scope of the exhibition, okay? And the publications that go with it, the catalog as well as the snapshots book. Okay, with that in mind, I would like to introduce each of the 6 co-curators. We'll be following in chronological order, starting first with Emma, who worked on daguerreotypes. And we'll give each student about 3 to 4 minutes to make a few comments. I'll show a few slides with respects to their research and give you kind of a sense of the kind of work they've been working on. Emma, want to take over?
Yeah, hi. So yeah, my section was on daguerreotypes. I wanted to explore a facet of daguerreotypes that isn't really researched very often, it's namely nude daguerreotypes, because nude imagery is such an important part of art, and it has been for such a long time, stemming back to fertility goddesses and ancient Greek sculptures of Venus. And with the advent of photography, which is a medium in which the individual herself is captured instead of just an artist's impression of her, totally changed the way that nude images were seen and experienced. And without that mythological or religious undertone, a nude woman in a photograph was simply an explicit body instead of high art. And so I researched 3 distinct variations of the nude daguerreotypes that I kind of identified. So there's the étude de près nature, which I'm sorry, I don't speak French, so pardon my French. And this is an example of that. It's an artistic study. And these were used by artists in place of live models, as models were very expensive to hire, especially in France. And then the second category is art daguerreotypes. As you can see here, this is a nude posed as Danae from Ovid's Metamorphosis. It's hand tinted with gold applied for the shower of gold falling on her. And these emulated the style of old master paintings. And then the third variety is a pornographic daguerreotype, which is the most ambiguous category, as many artistic studies and art daguerreotypes were also sold for pornographic gratification. Another ambiguity in nude daguerreotypes are the terms pornographic versus erotic. And so in order to define these terms, I used Gloria Steinem's definition, who said that, quote, erotica is rooted in eros, or passionate love, and thus in the idea of positive choice. Pornography begins with root porno, meaning prostitution or female captives, thus letting us know that the subject is not mutual love, but domination and violence against women, end quote. Thus, most of the nude daguerreotypes studied in my research deal with pornography, as there is likely no love-based relationship between the photographer and his model, but instead, to a degree, a relationship of exploitation. And so the audience for nude and pornographic daguerreotypes were generally upper-class men, as overall daguerreotypes were expensive to produce, and nude daguerreotypes were even more so, especially as heavy censorship laws kept operations underground. And often nude daguerreotypes were sold on the black market to upper class gentlemen. And while nude daguerreotypes became obsolete with the rise of negative-based photography, which could more readily and more cheaply supply the demand for pornographic imagery. The new daguerreotype marks the advent of the use of the nude in photography, as well as the beginning of the pornographic trade in earnest. And regardless of intent, these new daguerreotypes show the influences of classical and contemporary art and endeavor to connect the new technology to the long history of art, which is pretty beautiful in my opinion. So, thank you.
Thank you, Emma. Our second speaker this evening, Hill Goburn, will be addressing the topic of the Carlisle Indian School photographs.
Hello, can you hear me? All right, so I'm getting internet connections unstable, but good evening, everyone. Thank you for coming. Before I begin, I want to say thank you to my classmates, and thank you to Professor Aaron Fight for taking the time to diligently work with us throughout our senior year, despite all the challenges we met as a result of the pandemic, amongst other things. But this exhibition has been several months in the making, and we appreciate you all sharing this moment with us. But my essay focuses on the series of albumin paper prints and stereographs of Native Americans shot by John N. Choate in his studio at the Carlisle Indian School, or CIS, during the late 19th century, which at the time was headed by Richard Henry Pratt. Additionally, I outline necessary historical context regarding early relations between white Americans and Native Americans throughout the 18th century westward expansion and up until the founding of the CIS in 1879. I can conclusion that these factors resulted in the heavy commercialization and commodification of Native Americans, as well as skewed pseudoscientific philosophy and stereotypes that innately fueled a race-based dichotomy that is still present in today's society. But as the head of the CIS, Richard Henry Pratt sought to educate Native Americans in the ways of white American culture in order to create a new narrative distinct from the stereotypical savage Natives had been painted as, an effort to highlight their uniqueness and distinguish them as beneficial members to American society. In order to accomplish this, Pratt took advantage of photography's convincing nature to not only demonstrate the institution's efficacy, but to construct a carefully packaged, quote unquote, white-led version of Indianness. Choate's notorious before and after images, which you see here of Tom Torlino, which demonstrate one of the more prominent transformations, I'll say. But his before and after images show the results achieved through an education from the CIS. And by the time an Indian has been fully acculturated, not only do they possess different clothes and hairdo, but they appear to have become physically whiter. But Choate's photos solidify the civilized Native American canon, which should be commended, unlike the juxtaposed image of the savage. But this contrasting apposition was not only orchestrated by Pratt in an effort to sway public perception of the Native Americans, but to garner federal funding for his institution. Moreover, they gave rise to the massive commodification of Native American people and their culture into a spectacle known as the exotic or the other. These terms were applied because Indians' culture significantly differed from that of whites and therefore was always seen as exotic or other. And although Pratt made Indian culture accessible to Americans, it remained this fixated whitewash version, or rather stereotype. And Choate in particular recognized the marketability of selling cabinet cards, stereographs, as well as other trinkets that capitalize on the spectacle of the other and advertised them as souvenirs of the CIS, for Carlisle Indian School. Likewise, he promoted his studio and views of the Indian School on the backside of many of his images. So proving that stereotypes at the time they sold, and Indians were being progressively romanticized within Victorian pop culture through Choate's images, which resulted in a widespread production and consumption of Native American trading cards. And while Pratt did not have harmful intentions behind his education program, his actions had many negative implications that remain prevalent today. But that's just a bit about my topic and thesis, yeah. This image right here, for instance, it is a stereograph that was marketed showing the Carlisle cadets, the graduating cadets marching through Washington, D.C. And you can see here how they really were kind of a spectacle, like something to be audit, like, oh my gosh, there's so much different from how they've been perceived prior to photographs and illustrations described in other narratives, but they seem very dignified, noble, and to maintain morals. So this was something, it was a spectacle alone.
Well, thank you so much, Hill. we'll be moving on to the next component. Now we're kind of into the, historically, we're sort of moving into the early 20th century, but also moving through in some parts of the exhibition. He'll be talking more about this area that's kind of the domestic realm. Anna Elena, we're going to be moving into the turn of the century. So if you want to go ahead and present your research for us.
Okay, so hi everyone. As Professor Ehrenfeit mentioned, for the Senior Art History show, I worked on snapshots. So snapshots emerged in the late 19th century due to the technological developments in photography, such as better lenses, abundance of images, roll film, higher photosensitivity due to more light-sensitive emotions, and in general, shorter processing time. Snapshots contain humor and imperfections, just like the one you see in front of you on the screen. The snapshot's charm is in its accidental qualities, often produced by the photographer's lack of training. So during the fall semester, I was on campus, so I was able to select snapshots from Dickinson's archives and special collections for the show. It was really great to work with the physical objects, and the snapshot section of the show contains both loose snapshots and snapshots placed in photo albums. While I was doing research on snapshots, I came across a book dedicated to Kodak advertisements. I became really interested in the advertising campaigns that included the Kodak girl. You can see her in the image in front of you, wearing her typical blue and white striped dress. In my essay titled The Kodak Girl, A Snapshot of Women's Role in Photography, I examined Kodak Girl advertisements and snapshots from this era in which women are either behind or in front of the camera lens. The Kodak Girl reflects the growing freedom of women in the early 20th century. Although George Eastman, the founder of Kodak, did not primarily intend to uplift women's voices in photography, but rather to increase profits through these advertisements, a side effect of the marketing efforts were placing women in the center of photography. These women embraced their newly acquired independence to explore nature, travel, or drive. The image of the independent woman photographer in Kodak advertisements shaped perceptions of womanhood, as is suggested by snapshots from this era. The Kodak Girl advertising campaign declined in popularity during the period between World War I and World War II and officially ended in the 1970s. Snapshots, however, continue to grow in popularity, and today we experience them primarily through our cell phone cameras.
Okay, thank you so much, Anna Elena. Yes, you did have the unique experience among your 6 co-curators of actually being on campus. And I'm sorry that the other 5 of you did not have that same experience. It's a testament to those of you that are working at a distance at how much you were able to pull together only working through photographs of photographs and presentations, our dialogues in late night Zoom sessions. I should point out that in order to make all of this work, class met once a week, was it twice a week, in the evenings at, I think, what was it, 8 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, so that Su Chin wouldn't have to get up in the middle of the night for her research. And for her case, it was early morning. So I do want to extend a great deal of recognition and high remarks for those of you that were working at a great distance. Anna Elena had the easier set of responsibilities in that respect. Okay, our next speaker will be Jackson Rhodes. Oh, I'm sorry, no, Tenzin. I'm sorry, I went a little bit out of order here geographically or chronologically. Tenzin will be presenting material on Robert Frank's photographs.
All right. Well, hi everyone. Thank you for being here tonight. It's definitely been a long time coming, and I appreciate that everyone's taking the time to celebrate the work of the senior art history majors and Professor Ehrenfeit. So my essay focuses on Robert Frank's photo book, The Americans, a collection of images intended to capture everyday life of the average citizen. The book originally came into being through a fellowship Frank received from the John Simon Guggenheim Memorial Foundation. It features 83 images, which is only a fraction of the 27,000 Frank made during his travels back and forth across the American lower 48 states. By the time Frank began work on the Americans, the photo book was a well-established publication genre. It's essentially a book that presents a selection of photographs, usually by a single artist, and the photos are normally printed one or sometimes two per page, with limited to no text. The Americans focused on photographic imagery above all, admitting text excerpts except for explanatory titles and the book's introduction, which was written by Jack Kerouac. The book existed exclusively as a photo book until 2009, which was the first time the collection of images was shown in an individual exhibition. The images that Frank captured focused on authenticity, and he ultimately produced a series that was personal, poetic, and real. Frank's images were a stark contrast to the day's existing photo book standard, which was Edward Steichen's Family of Man. Steichen aimed to comfort the world with images that highlighted humanity's similarities to prove that humankind was one. After experiencing Steichen's harmonic, I'm tripping over my words today, but harmonized presentation of humankind, which lacked acknowledgement of artistic, cultural, or racial individuality, Frank sought to produce photographs that had a clear personal voice and appreciation for individual subjects. So while Frank's departure from the traditional story had distressed the photographic press, the beatnik subculture of America found it authentic and honest. So to study the relationship between the beat philosophy and Frank's street photography aesthetics, I turned to Jack Kerouac's introduction for the Americans. In Kerouac's introduction, he associates Frank's images with jazz, nomadic movement, and simplicity of all critical elements of beat philosophy and lifestyle. Frank's unapologetic and all-seeing lens led to Kerouac to state that Frank had captured the humor, the sadness, the everythingness, and Americanness of the country. Kerouac and other beats believed that the most authentic expression of reality was found when one possessed freedom of movement and openness of mind. The qualities of Frank's images that invited criticism from photographic circles, the slanted horizons, blurry focus, and quick-fire compositions earned praise among the beatniks. And despite its poor reception, Robert Frank and the Americans would mark a change in the photographic style. And in the 1970s, critics reevaluated Frank's works. They found value in Frank's methods and images. Upon his passing in 2019, the National Public Radio released an article with sentiments from modern photographers expressing how exposure to Frank's works altered their eye through the camera. These modern-day reflections of Frank's works are reflective of what Kerouac testified in his introduction. Frank captured the authenticity of Americans, and that testimony remains relevant today.
Okay, thank you so much. I want to also emphasize the importance here of Tenzin's work in conjunction with, there's a kind of a through line in the exhibition dealing with published works, and it raises this question of, as you see behind me, original photographs that are collected and on display in a museum environment, but the reality is the impact of photography is much greater often through its reproduced form in books and in journals. And looking at the Americans as Tenzin has, particularly through the lens of Kerouac's introduction, you gain an appreciation for how important the book is. And when you see it in person, you can see from the photographs, it's a smaller sort of book. It's striking how important the published book is for disseminating ideas of photography. And it raises a really important theme about the importance of reproduction and publication. And we're going to follow that theme to Jackson's work on Life magazine. Go ahead, Jackson.
Hi, thanks everyone for coming. Thank you to everyone who worked on this, especially Professor Aaron Feit for all your work organizing an entire exhibition digitally. So my essay for the exhibition details how the My Lai massacre in Vietnam of March 16, 1968 became an international scandal as a result of photojournalist Ron Haberle's images, which were published about a year and a half later on December 5th, 1969 in Life magazine. I first learned about the massacre my junior year of high school, and although this certainly isn't a topic I found enjoyable at all, I saw it as an opportunity to reinforce my previous feelings of disgust and shock with greater depth and research and a focus on the photojournalism aspect of the event. And one reason for why it took so long for the story to reach the light of day was because of the Army's strict censorship of photography during the Vietnam War, where photos taken by Army-issued cameras that may have been deemed as harmful towards American incentives in the war were kept from the public eye. And actually the reason why these photos were eventually published was just because the photographer used a personal camera and developed the photos independently of any Army supervision. And as my section in Light of the Past was about photo books and albums, I spent some time discussing the nature of publishing photos in a mass-produced magazine. That these photos were published in Life magazine is especially significant given Life's wide popularity and ubiquity with photographic documentation in the mid-20th century as a self-described show book of the world. Also that the Life editors chose to attach the Me Light article halfway through the issue without visually addressing it on the cover, which is instead an African envelope, is different in that it makes readers somewhat spontaneously flip onto images instead of making the conscious decision to do so and picking up the issue. And although to discuss in depth the ethics and past practices of photojournalism as a whole would have likely made my essay a good 10 or so pages more lengthy with inconsistencies and controversy, I touch on some of these topics with the backing of scholars such as Walter Benjamin and Susan Sontag, each of whom offer separate analysis on things such as false objectivity of photojournalism, if a mass-produced image is in fact the original image or not, and what it could mean to say a photographer is appropriating reality. Although eventually practically no one involved in the massacre was punished for their actions, let alone face appropriate justice, the effect of such a public exhibition of American brutality abroad was a flashpoint for objection to the war effort, causing reactions that have since mirrored anti-American protest sentiments for decades to come.
All right, thank you so much, Jackson. And I think the participants here are getting this thread that pulls through in this question of reproduction. And that I think is something that reverberates to the whole question of photography. Now, of course, in the current realm with the digital cameras, digital capture and digital publications, these questions of time and the time lapse between the moment of capture is made and the moment you see it on the press is remarkably short, if not even measured in milliseconds. It also raises the question of what is the original photograph anymore. Now you can see the original photograph without any degradation of printing quality or the experience of it. It's shot digitally and it's experienced digitally. There are no longer these lenses and these experiences that are being introduced in between the original photograph and what the viewer experiences. Our last presenter is Suchin Chi, who will be looking at projected images. Suchin?
Yep.
Go right ahead.
So thank you for being here to attend this opening. My section includes projection and illumination. So first, I want to briefly talk about these two concepts. Projected photography is the result of combining several technical discoveries relating to capturing, seeing an image that are projected or illuminated onto wall or other kinds of surface. The idea of projecting an image comes from camera obscura, which is a darkened room with a small hole at one side through which an image is projected onto the wall opposite the hole. And in this case, light is reflected off the surface of photograph. Illuminated works demonstrate how light is emitted or illuminated from the back of a translucent image to human eyes. The touch screen of cell phone that we use today obviously is the most common application of illumination we can experience. So these are two ways different from how we interact with light source in common photographs. So in my research paper, I mainly talked about Colorama, which is the large backlit display from Kodak's company, presenting various panoramic views of 20th century life in the United States. In their day, the Colorama represented the height of innovative advertising techniques that promoted photographic products as part and idealized representation of American culture. These gigantic images reflect and reinforce American values and aspirations in the form of archive and memory, as well as simultaneously promote photography as an essential leisure activity with social functions. So even though the imagery problematically omitted any reference to diversity or a range of ethnicity, these surfaces were designed to maintain eye contact, to embrace the multiplicity of the aspects of an individual's life. I also raised several questions for further consideration. How is the imagery connected to viewers' physical, technical, and emotional properties? Between the coloramas of the 1960s and today's touchscreens, did the display of the surfaces alter something in the way that the image is constructed in public space? So with these ideas in mind, I hope you can enjoy these works, which are taken in light of the past. Thank you.
Thank you, Sue Chin. As you can see, this weaves in nicely with some of the work that Annalena did with the Kodak girl. You get a sense of the role of marketing and Kodak's dominant position within the photographic world up until the moment it invented the digital camera and then did not capitalize on the digital camera's invention. As many know that if you had stock in Kodak, you know the sad story of what happened to that company. Okay. I urge you all to see the exhibition in person if that's possible. I know that presently it's accessible only to students, faculty, staff, and administrators of the college. The good news is that the exhibition will be running through October 9. So hopefully the health conditions will permit a broader audience to visit it perhaps over the summer and into the autumn. So those of you that can see the exhibition now, I certainly urge you to do so. Those of you that are in the area and have to wait a little bit, I can assure you it's certainly worth the wait. I do want to extend a few thank yous, which this exhibition, as I said earlier, has I've racked up quite a bit of a debt here on it to a number of people. First of all, I'd like to thank my greatest thanks to all who have made the campus safe during the pandemic, and to make this exhibition, excuse me, a reality. 7 months ago, I told the curators that this project, that we would mount this exhibition, but I couldn't commit to a firm date. It could be in March of this year as planned, or if things went poorly, it could be in winter of 22 or winter of 23. We just didn't know. That we are able to host the exhibition in person now is the result of everyone in the college community doing their part to make it safe to produce activities such as this exhibition. While I would prefer that we were hosting this evening's reception in person, conducting it as a remote event is a small price to pay for our safety and the ability to produce the project at this time. I encourage all of the students, faculty, and staff to experience this exhibition and to applaud the work of this year's team of co-curators. I hope that the health conditions permit the college to welcome members of the college community and friends back to campus, particularly at graduation, if at all possible, so that they may enjoy this exhibition as well. I also thank the parents, family members, and friends of the co-curators whose support over the years has enabled these students to grow and excel as scholars and individuals and to produce this remarkable show and scholarship. I thank the administration, particularly Margie Ensign and Neil Weissman and other members of the senior cabinet for the ongoing support of this important programmatic initiative. I thank the faculty, many of whom worked closely with the co-curators over the past 4 years, making my job at the end of the line when they're seniors much easier. In particular, I'd like to thank my colleagues in art and art history. I must also mention the library staff, who Annalena already alluded to, particularly Jim Gerenser, who made access to the photographic collections of the archives and special collections available to us for this project under such challenging circumstances. Other lenders to the exhibition require recognition as well. They include Richard Tritt, at the Cumberland County Historical Society, and Catherine Blake at the Juniata College Museum of Art. I also thank the Friends of the Trout Gallery and the members of the advisory committee who provide invaluable resources and guidance as we seek to realize the mission of the museum, and by extension, that of the college. As always, I owe a great debt to those that design services in the Print Center who provide much of the college's outstanding printed and graphic materials. And lastly, I'm fortunate to work with the great staff at the Trout Gallery, James Bowman, who I've mentioned earlier in exhibition design, Heather Flaherty in museum education, Meredith Kostopoulos and Kathy Sacco and Susan Russell in our area of visitor services. I thank as well the museum's team of interns and ambassadors who extend the reach of the museum and the support of its operations. Now, traditionally, all of the co-curators would meet just before the exhibition opens in the print room, and we'd raise a glass and toast. Well, I have my glass here with me. I'm the only person in the gallery right now, but if you have a glass or a beverage in front of you, I'd like you to reach for it and raise it in salute and honor to all of those who worked on this exhibition, particularly our 6 co-curators. Congratulations. Now, in the time that remains, I'd like to open it up to questions to any of our co-curators from the participants in this Zoom reception. And I think, Bianca, can you handle the questions here?
Yeah, absolutely. We had an earlier question from David Blackburn. A question about the Carlisle Indian School photographer manipulating the images to make skin lighter or darker to differentiate between before and after.
It sounds like a question for Hill.
Yeah, so I actually responded to him privately, but I did say it was common for the photographer to incorporate additional props to amplify the individual being photographed innate Indianness. But in regard to the after photos, similar actions were taken at times to demonstrate the transformation natives underwent as a result of the CIS. And it is speculated, I do recall reading that he did indeed use some type of powder, or at times it's speculated that he did use some type of powder to lighten their skin. But Tom Torlino, the image that was shown, was the poster boy for the CIS, as his transformation just was the starkest.
Thank you, David.
We have another question from Sheena. Do you think the cell phone pictures take away from the uniqueness of previous photos that took more time to set up and complete?
I'm going to actually pass that one on to Anna Elena, since she worked on photographs that were taken quickly first. We'll get your response first, Anna Elena.
Yeah, well, there's definitely a transition of who can be a photographer. So from photographers who went under training, and then more amateur photographers, and today everyone is basically a photographer with their cell phone camera. So, I mean, in terms of quality, it's very personal and subjective on what you think is an aesthetically pleasing photograph. But in general, I think it also compensated with the technology for the widespread use of photography.
Any other co-curators want to jump in on that?
Yeah, this is something we discussed a lot in the show, especially because we included the snapshot section of the show. And it is definitely subjective. And personally, I think that snapshots and just any kind of snapshot is a really personal, special photo for the person that took it, regardless of whether it's high art or not. I don't know. I think with the cell phone, it's harder for people in the art world to say, oh, that's high art. It becomes more of oh, that's just a photo that you took of your daughter of a birthday party or whatever. But it's still an important photo, regardless.
Actually, I'm going to ask actually, Anna Elena, there's a quote that you used in your show that from Model. Do you mind? Can you call that from memory?
Yes, it goes along the lines that a snapshot basically comes closest to the truth out of all types of photography. Yeah.
And she was a street photographer, kind of in some ways inspired by someone like Robert Frank. And this idea of it not being posed, it not being influenced by artifice. There's a certain truthfulness, which in some ways also runs along the lines of like Kerouac and the beat philosophies, where without, it reduces the a priori thought. Anyone else care to join in?
We might have another question. I think this one might be for Emma. Were the women that were photographed in the daguerreotypes paid?
That's a really good question. I believe they were. There's a lot of overlap, especially in France, where most of the research about daguerreotypes and new daguerreotypes in particular was done. They often overlapped with prostitution, and that was kind of how it was for a lot of like painting models as well. And they were most likely paid. Probably not a lot, and there's no information about who these women were. But yeah, they probably were paid to some degree.
Any other questions, Bianca?
I'm not seeing any more.
We'll give another moment or two for those of you who are pondering a question. I just want to further one thing. I have the advantage. I'm surrounded by the exhibition, and I just can't help but be so impressed with all the work that you've done on this show. And oh, I do want to add one thing too before I forget. Heather, there is a program coming up in April. Do you want to give a little more information on that, or Bianca?
Sure, absolutely. Students actually purchased 2 photographs by the contemporary artist Lissa Rivera on one of their recent student purchase trips. And these photographs examine the role of gender in photography and think about ways in which gender is interpreted, transformed, and constructed through photography. And these have been really exciting photographs to teach with. And so we are going to be with the center, the LGBTQ Center on campus, hosting Lissa Rivera and BJ, who is her model and collaborator in her photography series in April. We're looking at April 8th as our date, but we will send out information as soon as we have that confirmed. But they're going to be giving a presentation on those works. So that's an upcoming event to mark your calendars with.
In fact, if I can, I'm going to try and see if I can't. Whoops, wasn't quite what I wanted to do. What I'm showing behind me here, I'm going to turn the camera. There we go. There's Lisa's work there. Is that clear to all of you? Okay. Well, I think we're kind of closing in. Are there any other questions that some of you may have regarding the students' research, the exhibition at large?
Emily, do you want to ask your question? I see your hand is raised.
Yes, I just want to say excellent job to all the curators. And I was wondering, what was your favorite part of the curating process? I know it was difficult, but there must have been something that you really enjoyed doing.
Well, Emma, do you want to start?
Sure. I really loved, I was able to stop in on campus briefly and get to see the daguerreotypes in person. And that was incredible. Just like getting to finally handle them after months and months of just looking at them on the screen. They're really tiny and they're so much more tactile than I was expecting. It was so exciting to see them. So I think that was definitely my favorite part.
Anna Elena?
Yeah, so like I mentioned, I was on campus, so mine is kind of similar to Emma's, but I was able to work with the snapshots. So the physical objects, and that was just a great part of the whole experience.
And Tenzin?
Well, I'm currently on campus, so mine's the same, but to not echo my classmates, I really liked like aesthetically being able to choose images from the Trout Gallery and put them together while also making sure that like, comprehensively everything was covered, but that it all looked good together. Thought that was fun.
I think also too, Tenzin, you had a pretty unfiltered response to seeing the first proofs of your essay in design form.
Yes, yeah, that was really exciting too. Just finally, I think that everyone's essay starts, or at least mine start in like a very rough bullet pointed list that is awful normally. And so being able to like finally see it like in the full printed form, you know, a lot of pressure, I guess, makes a diamond, but it was pretty cool.
Well, in some ways, particularly too, given the nature of photography and its relationship to printing, now that you're working, now you have a window into how text and images come together in a book form. It gives you a little bit of a backside view of this profession and the role of photography in it. Sue Chin, do you have any comments about what was your favorite part or what most impressed you about the process?
Yeah, I think it's difficult and been tough time, but I feel really interesting and exciting when we all 7 of us gather together and make the decision of like the title and the theme and the design of catalog. And I feel like it renders me a feeling of the working atmosphere in museum. I feel excited. Yeah.
Thanks, Sue Chin. In fact, I'd have to say my biggest sadness in working on the show is that so much comes together in the last month, if not the last few weeks. And given the nature of our timing and you all being spread out, many of you being spread out, not having that ability to see things come together. Usually in any given day, working with Jamie on the layout, the detailed side of things. You guys did the larger, broader conceptual side, which actually was the more complex and more difficult side of things. I wish you had the opportunity to see Jamie and I argue about daguerreotypes and how best to light and install them. I think you'll find the results quite impressive, but getting there was not an easy process. And I regret that you didn't see that back and forth. Maybe it wasn't so pleasant to watch, but there's a back and forth process in the museum world that leads to a great result. And that's a regret that I have, that we couldn't somehow make that happen in person. Gil?
Yeah, I mean, I really did enjoy being able to be very hands-on with everyone in terms of an exhibition like ground up. That's something that I've never been able to really experience. So that was very fun, you know, because we all got to come together as class like 8 o'clock at night, just talk about the show. And even aside from like building the show, learning about photography from like the way we did starting all the way back in the early 19th century up until the modern era. And you know, we're all photographers, we can all be considered photographers, but realizing the significance and the power of photography, learning about that was really fun and enjoyable. So yeah.
And Jackson?
I think similar to what Zhu Ching was saying, I really enjoyed like those last few weeks where we actually got to discuss, you know, what should and what shouldn't go into the exhibition. It really felt like it's like the most art history we could possibly get. I really enjoyed that.
I think, and one of the things too, is we're torn over a lot of issues regarding photography and the role of exploitation. Our images of corpses in your particular case, or our images of nudes in fine art or more arguably pornographic scenarios. We had a long debate about whether or not to include mortuary daguerreotypes. There's a whole genre of photographs made of deceased, particularly children, who in the mid-19th century, infant mortality rates were very high, and families would have photographs made of their children post-mortem. Do we include those in the exhibition. And this was an area, it's a really rich and I think very helpful discussions that we had on these matters, and how to kind of find your way through. At what point is it just simply there to catch someone's eye, or is there something more meaningful behind including it? And how to address that in an exhibition setting. It raises a whole number of questions, particularly on the ethical side. What is the ethics of showing certain people in compromised scenarios without their knowledge? So it was, I think, a very useful, a very rewarding series of discussions. Unless there are any other comments, I'll do one last call for questions. Any other questions out there?
Yeah, I think Neil, if you'd like to unmute.
Please.
No, I actually don't have a question. I just wanted to say it's really great work. And at a time when I think all of us need to see uplifting and good work, it's really a refreshing and something that I think all of us really can appreciate. So thank you for what you've done.
Well, in response, as I said earlier, Neil, thank you for creating conditions where this could be possible, particularly during the course of the student senior year. So. And on that note, Bianca, I think we can say goodnight to everyone. Thank you all for participating, and I hope to see you here at the gallery.